And in this episode of Making It in Asheville, we sit down with Marilyn Ball of Speaking of Travel. Let's start with a quick soundbite from Marilyn.
Having these kind of open-ended conversations, to me, are so real. And I think that when I finally realized that, when I listened back over time to the conversations I was having, that's when I started to realize that I didn't really have anything to be nervous about because I was just being me. And like you said, I think, Sarah, it's if nobody else listens, if I didn't have one listener, it wouldn't really matter because it's me being my authentic self talking to somebody who in turn is comfortable enough to be their authentic self. That's the way I want to live my life, like that's the baseline for me and for you. And I think that's why we've connected and been attracted to each other.
Welcome to Making It in Asheville Season 4. This is a podcast where you get to hear the stories behind some of your favorite artists and businesses in town. Each episode, we interview a different local Ashevillean and we uncover how they're making it in Asheville, what they're making it in Asheville, and provide you with actionable insights from each conversation.
And we're your hosts. That was Sarah, and I am Tony, and we are a husband and wife team who moved to Asheville in May of 2019, almost a year ago. And since then, we've set out to answer a single question. That question is, how does one make it in Asheville? This podcast has been the result.
Before we dive in, we just want to take a quick moment to talk a little bit about our sponsor for this season. This is our first sponsor ever of the podcast. We're very, very excited to say that Range Urgent Care is our sponsor.
And so Range, if you're not familiar, is located in Asheville, North Asheville on Merriman. And they are a fundamentally different approach to urgent care, to, let's say, healthcare generally. The way that I like to think about it is like in terms of vibes, way less DMV, way more REI. And the best part is not just the vibes, but it is the like transparent pricing. And so I have a fun and interesting and scarring urgent care experience in my history, and I will share it with you one day. And the thing that I was left with was this fear that even the smallest injury, and I'll point to it if you're on YouTube, it's on my hand, could lead to hundreds or thousands of dollars in fees, and that is just not the case with Range Urgent Care. So transparent pricing means that every time you visit, it's $149, or it's less if you use a subscription, which I have, and we have a sponsorship special offer for you, our listener. If you go to makingitinasheville.com/range, you will get a free month with a membership, a annual membership to Range, which is just $30 a month for a single standard membership.
Yeah, and we think that this is really worth it for anybody who's perhaps self-employed or a small business here in town, because as many of you know, as we personally know, healthcare, traditional healthcare can be very expensive and very hard to have when, you're just starting out or you're self-employed. And so this is a fantastic option to protect yourself and know that you can get affordable care. And when you pay for the annual membership, again, you know exactly what you're going to be paying every month. You know exactly what you're going to be getting every month. And so it just kind of gives you that peace of mind versus you don't know what the bill is going to be and you're going to have to pay out of pocket.
Right. And we have health insurance, and the issue for me historically has been that we have a very high deductible. We're healthy. We don't and so knowing that I have to go thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket before, air quotes, health insurance really kicks in, it helps me to know that whatever is up will cost me a very fixed dollar amount or just a singular dollar amount every month. And so again, there's more to read and more to see on that. We'll keep it fast today, but it's a really exciting opportunity, one that we were proud to share. Visit makingitinasheville.com/range to hear about some of the services and all of the membership offers that they have.
Yeah, and don't forget the .com, makingitinasheville.com/range.
That is very important to remember. All right. And so this episode 51 of the Making It in Asheville podcast, is with a very special guest, a mentor of ours, Marilyn Ball, who has been in the podcast game for 7 years, she said, and is like the sweetest heart. She's been in Asheville for about 30 years or over 30 years.
Yeah.
And she is just, to me, like living, breathing community engagement and support in the truest and realest form.
Yeah, and Marilyn has, because she's been here for so long, she's seen a lot in Asheville. She knows the city very, very well. In fact, she wrote an entire book about the history of Asheville called The Rise of Asheville. And so in this episode, we talk a lot about what Asheville was like 30 years ago and lessons that she's learned over the years of seeing businesses grow and the city really collaborating together. We felt this was a really, really important person to interview at this time with COVID going on, because it is, a time where the community really needs to come together. And so we loved interviewing her. Marilyn's podcast is called Speaking of Travel, and it's all about travel, as you can guess. And she interviews people all over the world and all over the country about their traveling experiences. It's an iHeartRadio podcast. Definitely encourage you to give that a listen if you have a few minutes today too.
For sure. And so this episode, for a lot of reasons, is important to us. It's the importance of thinking about community today. It's knowing where we've come from. And she is, as you'll see, just absolutely incredible, a sweetheart. The transferables that stood out to me, and you will get to hear more about them in the episode, are Marilyn seems to have a super skill, a superpower of finding win-win-wins for in complex relationships. She has been in sales and in advertising and in marketing for the last 30 years, and those skills to me are absolutely exceptional, and there are lessons that we can learn by listening to her story and listening to this episode. And so without further ado, let's hop into episode 51 with Marilyn Ball. Please, please, please enjoy. The floor is yours. I would love to just dive in and allow you to introduce yourself, and we can talk.
Well, I'm Marilyn Ball. I have a marketing and PR firm called 1212 Cooperative Solutions, also known as 1212 Marketing. I've lived in Asheville since 1977, so I've been here a long time. I also have a radio show and a podcast going on. This is my 7th year, called Speaking of Travel, which was actually a little side hustle, just hobby that became a show on iHeartRadio and a podcast. Yeah, just kind of happened. Well, it didn't just happen. Nothing just happened, of course.
You made it happen.
Right. A lot of things went into making that happen. So yeah, I've lived in Asheville a long time. This is my home. In fact, it's really funny. I just have to kind of throw this out there with social media being what it is and people connecting now more than ever. There's been this whole train on Facebook with people that I went to high school with. So everybody's all kind of connecting and finding old pictures and putting them up. Right. Remember when we went to Ocean City and we were all drunk, and, and then other people are finding it and they're coming on now. And so it's really put me in this place of, wow, look at what we were doing when I was in high school, not to age myself, but the people that I was in high school with went to Vietnam. They were, in fact, a lot of these guys that we're connecting with now, all these years later, are Vietnam vets. But back then they were just our, drinking buddies and the guys that we went out with, and to now talk to them like, where did your life go when you came home? Because my family, I grew up in Washington, D.C., right at a time when all that was happening. So, it was very impressionable to be a part of a movement of, coming together and questioning authority and, really like getting off the grid and saying, we're not going to do it this way.
Seems like there might be a little foreshadowing about the 2020 world that we're living in now.
I know, right?
What we'll say is, let's quickly pin that, because I do want to get back into the history, and I do want to also talk about we've had some meaningful conversations about the world as it exists today, and then even just 3 months ago, like the first time we sat down and had lunch together, and how much has changed. And so to stay kind of present, I would love to hear more about your podcast, about your maybe more recent histories in marketing and PR, because when we got to finally meet you after seeing your book and hearing about you on Instagram and on Facebook, and everyone saying, "Oh, you got to meet Marilyn," one of the things that really stood out for us was like, "Oh, she'd be incredible as a salesperson for seemingly anything." And that looks like it was maybe part of your work professional history recently, or I don't know, in the last little while.
Well, that is where I am actually right now. Being in the present, having lived in this community for all these years, and coming here at a time when people were looking at a place to homestead, where it was kind of off the grid, but there was a community kind of happening, but everything was boarded up. You look at Asheville today, I just saw a montage of photos and everything looks kind of boarded up. It's kind of where it was back then. So I feel that we're really in a crossroads right now in how we all are going to kind of continue and create community. So when I first came here, I was a Montessori teacher. I taught in a parent cooperative school, but eventually I went back to school and got my degree from UNCA in Mass Comm and went to work for an emerging ad agency. So to be able to put it in perspective, that was the beginning for me of being really embracing this community that I had come here. So many people had come here wanting to create community, and now I got to market it and say, wow, this is such a great place. You really need to come here. All the time thinking, what are we doing? We're inviting everybody to come because we love this place so much, and we want to create a local economy so we can live here and be able to support each other's dreams and passions. And yet, over the years, all that worked because people came together and collaborated on marketing. We were able to create a brand, if you will. This is a place to really settle when you're ready to get away from it all and be yourselves. Yeah. And over the years, that kept happening.
And so just for context, because I think, for our audience and also for ourselves, because we're new here and a lot of people that are listening to this podcast are relatively new to Asheville or perhaps considering a move to Asheville. What was Asheville like when you first came? Can you describe a little bit about what was going on just so we can get a better sense?
Of course. So when we first came here, we were looking for farmland. That was our goal. So we had been looking all over. And when we got to Western North Carolina, we realized there was beautiful farmland. There was, we were in Appalachia, and being in Appalachia was, at that time, not unlike it was 100 years ago. People were living self-sufficiently on their farms and going to their neighborhood churches and other places of worship. There were communities of people here, and they were living off the land, and we wanted to do that. But at the same time, there was a downtown area that back in the early 1920s, had been a vibrant tourism mecca. There was Biltmore House, which of course was not, I don't even think they were really open to the public yet. Maybe they had just started. But there were businesses downtown, even though the buildings were in disarray and it was kind of boarded up, like I mentioned, and kind of a sad looking place. It was like if you rubbed off the dirt and the grime, you could see beautiful Art Deco buildings. And because the city of Asheville had gone into debt during the Depression, they had made a decision back in the 20s that they were not going to do any revitalization in the community until that debt was paid off. So right when we were getting here in the late 70s, that debt had been paid off. And so the downtown area was wide open, but the Asheville Mall had been built. It was over in the east side of town. And the shops that were downtown, there was a shoe store and just your basic kind of stores were downtown. But there were also some little coffee shops that were happening, and the people who lived here, that's something that I can't stress enough. These weren't the tourists. There weren't any tourists. These were the people our age, who were just coming out of Vietnam and all of that. They were born and raised here in Asheville, but they were the ones who were questioning authority and looking at life like we were looking at it. They were starting to create these little centers of gathering spots like Malaprops and the Captain's Bookshelf. And there were a couple of food co-ops. People were already, Dinner for the Earth, which is now Earth Fair, had opened. So there were places where people could gather and start to get to know each other. But the city decided that what they wanted to do was to tear down 11 city acres, basically, just raise it, tear it down, and build a downtown mall. That the only way people were really going to come to town was to go to a mall, and they did not want them going out to East Asheville. So they had already made that decision, unbeknownst to a lot of people, that was in the works. So we're talking about Haywood Street, Walnut Street, Lexington Avenue, all of that downtown core.
And how long had you been in Asheville when that happened? Do you remember?
About a year. Okay. It was already starting to happen when we got there. We were hearing buzzes about that.
Yeah.
And suddenly somebody started Save Downtown Asheville. This guy named Wayne Caldwell. And people got involved. And that whole story was really the beginning of how Asheville emerged.
Is this people stood hand in hand and physically showed how much of downtown was going to get removed? Am I thinking of the right story?
There was a young woman who was born and raised here. Her name is Peggy Gardner, and she was a student at UNCA, and she was an art major, and she was studying Cristo. You know Cristo?
No, Count of Monte.
He does installations. He did a huge installation in Central Park in Italy. He's very famous, Cristo. And she was studying him and had this idea, what if we had an installation, basically, inspired by Cristo, and we circled the entire 11 city acres with fabric. And we could show the, sorry about that. We could show the impact. Whoops.
We're still good. We're here.
Okay. Sorry.
It's all right.
Let me get back here. We could show that impact. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so she went to a local manufacturer down on the River Road, and she asked him if he would donate the fabric, and he did. And he donated enough fabric, and she gathered all these people, and on a certain day at a certain time, everybody went and raced around that area. The TV people came and reported on it, the newspaper, and it went public. And that was the first time that the public knew the impact of what was happening. And over the next 2 years, the Save Downtown Asheville people and the city had debates. It became a big controversy, a lot of sides, a lot of discourse, but everybody moving together. Like, we're opposed or we're for, but let's argue, let's debate, let's come to common ground. And ultimately what happened was the people of Asheville and Buncombe County came to find out that in order for that mall to be built, there had to be a referendum, which meant they were going to pay for it. And they didn't know that. And once that came out, the city lost and we won. And what that meant was the beginning of the dialogue of, okay, what are we going to do now? And that's when the Downtown Preservation Association was created, and that's when the city started the room tax, the occupancy tax. Money started flowing in for marketing. Businesses started to emerge, but it was always based on local. Always, there was always kind of a rule that we were not bringing in outside big stores, no chains in the downtown area. And so over the next 30 years, that happened, with 80% of our community being small business, as you know.
Yeah, I love that. I love that particular story. And I'll just add one thing is that in your book, which we have a copy of, The Rise of Asheville, there are some really, really fantastic pictures of showing what happened with that mall and people holding sheets up. And there's just some really great little, tidbits of information in there that I would encourage people who are maybe new here to check out.
I mean, we have a YouTube channel. If you are watching on YouTube, here is a little visual aid. If you're listening on the podcast, check out our YouTube channel. But that is awesome. And just to connect some mental dots, because I had a feeling that was the story. We heard that through a mutual friend, Kay Bentley, episode whatever, who shared that while looking over on downtown and the mall, and saying that this almost was, can you believe it, removed from Asheville in what would that have been, the late 70s, almost 80s?
Yep, exactly. In fact, the room tax, the occupancy tax discussion started right after that happened. And that is a very important part of our history, because the people who lived here, whose businesses were saved, they were going to take their businesses by eminent domain. They had no choice. So now their businesses are saved and everybody's looking towards the future. But the only way that anybody felt we could create an economic development engine to create jobs, because that's really what it was about. It wasn't about bringing tourists and having what ultimately happened. At that time, it was, how do we keep people living here in this community when it has gone so far down? We have to bring it back up. And because tourism was historically the economic driver for this region, and Mr. Cecil from the Biltmore Estate, who owned the Biltmore Estate, was a very active leader in this community. And there were other visionary leaders in this community. the idea was, why don't we look at what other cities are doing and impose a 2% tax on every room that we rent? The hoteliers said that. They said, we will pay that money out of our room tax, and that money can only be used for marketing the region. So when that was passed by the state legislators, they had about $400,000 or $500,000 because there were only a few hotels here. And with that money, they started a Cool Green Asheville campaign and created a marketing strategy around who would come here. What kind of visitors do we want to attract? Marketing research was very important and very involved. And nobody ever would have imagined, fast forward, to suddenly having a $25 million budget.
Yeah, sure. I want to go back just a second. I want to kind of know what was going through your mind personally when the story of the mall was happening. Were you out on the street holding up sheets? Were you doing something behind the scenes, or like what was happening for you personally?
Well, by that point, there had already been a community. In the short time I was here, a year and a half, let's say, people started calling ourselves the Asheville 1000. In fact, we have an ongoing list of who those people are. Those were people who lived here and the people who had moved here, who had all started a kind of a potluck community. You know, we all were doing organic gardening, and we had hangout spots, and we do contra dancing. And so the Asheville 1000, everywhere you went, you would see the same people. They were the core group of activists almost. So Save Downtown Asheville was comprised primarily by the Asheville 1000. We were all part of that. Oh, I don't know. Sorry. We were all part of that, and Wayne Caldwell was our leader, if you will. And so while Peggy had her group of people who were doing it was called the RAP. They called it the RAP. The rest of us were putting up signs and holding town meetings. So the day of the RAP, everybody was out for sure. But behind the scenes, everybody was, they were working it to get the word out and get people's minds changed. And I think it was because of the times. You know, there was a lot of activism going on at that time, a lot of rebellion, and a lot of, not letting the man win. We took this cause so personally because our futures and our children's futures was at stake. Yeah. And we just loved the people who lived here and their families, and definitely didn't want to see all those businesses taken away.
So if I were to then try and fast forward from, I'll call it around 1980 to around 2010, what were some of the biggest changes? What were, like, how did your role in Asheville evolve over those years?
Well, definitely when I started working for Kelso Advertising in 1991, I had just graduated from UNCA, and electronic media was just really coming out, and there was a lot of documentaries being made, and our agency worked primarily with tourism, hospitality, and economic development. And in the early 90s, those industries were just emerging, because between 83, when the room tax came to be, and 91, when I started at Kelso, that train had just taken off. And our agency, we were very small. We were located right downtown on the corner of Lexington and Walnut. It was, we were working with very rural tourism counties. So, our clients were Swain County, Haywood County. We worked in Murphy, all the counties west of Asheville, and the Cherokee Indian Reservation. So the Cherokee were just coming into having tourism. We were hired as their agency. And our role was to really help the industry recognize that they had no money, and the only way that they were going to be able to really create a brand and market was to work collaboratively, and to not look at each other as competitors, but rather look at each other as players in a much bigger package. And that took time to do. It was an educational thrust, but that's what our agency did, and we were able to work with Asheville and Buncombe County, a much bigger tourism entity, and over time there was, well, at that time too, I should definitely mention, is that we had the state of North Carolina had economic development agencies throughout the state, and we had one in Western North Carolina called Advantage West, and it handled 24 counties, and there was economic money that could be distributed to entrepreneurs, to small businesses, to help drive the economy. And they recognized, because of the work we were all doing in the tourism industry, that tourism was an economic driver, and they started contributing $50,000 every year to membership organizations that were starting to form through tourism. So within those 10 years, a huge industry growth started happening because we had economic resources. The counties and the attractions and the hoteliers and the small businesses all came together to leverage what little money they had into a bigger pot of money, so that we could market in Southern Living and Our State and other big magazines. We worked with a lot of golf courses. We formed a golf association, so all the golf courses could come together and leverage what dollars they had. And then we could buy ads in Golf Digest and Golf Magazine and say, come to the Great Smokies golf trail. You can not only golf here at Etowah, but you can also golf here at Reems Creek. And over time, we were able to really create this much larger brand for those rural counties. And I felt that my role was definitely being the person who was working with our clients to educate them and help them develop these campaigns and ways to get the word out.
Yeah, when I think of our first kind of lunch together, one of the stories that stands out, and I wonder where this plots in your timeline, just kind of underlined how it seems that you have an incredible eye at identifying and presenting win-wins. And so somewhere along the line, you sold was it like a rest stop campaign to McDonald's or to Coca-Cola or to something with respect to the Blue Ridge Parkway? I know that I don't have the story right, but something about that was like, oh, how innovative that you took this opportunity to sell ads and have a wonderful project get funded by people who had extra money and wanted awareness. Can you tell some of that story and tell us where that plots?
Well, the story that I think about it didn't have anything to do with McDonald's or corporate, but
maybe Bank of America. It was somebody gigantic. It was just the biggest brand, is what my mind remembers.
Right. It was actually pretty local.
Okay.
It was the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area, which is a pretty big brand for Western North Carolina, and they get federal money to promote 24 counties as a heritage area, which is a pretty big thing. But they had limited funds, and they really wanted to get the word out because they were new, for people to understand what that was. So I had an idea to collaborate with the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area and WNCW Radio out of Spindale, and WNC Magazine, which was just starting and emerging right then. So, and this is something that I did very frequently, was to try to look at who are really like think of themselves as competitors, especially in the media, and work together to create a shared collaboration. So WNCW and WNC Magazine and the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area sat down at the table together, and they came up with this idea where the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area would have stories that they would give to WNC Magazine, who would then put them in the magazine, the stories, and WNCW would create a show, a radio show. So it all hooked in together to make that happen. So that's one of many stories. I think maybe what you were thinking about was a story that I had with Harrah's Cherokee Casino, because I worked with, because I worked with the tribe starting in 1991. We were very instrumental in helping the tribe when they started Harrah's Cherokee Casino. We were on the ground, and Harrah's brought us in as their local marketing agency. And I went on to work for Harrah's for 20 consecutive years. And there were many times where I would bring the media together, very competitive media partners, into a playing field to help me create really great marketing strategies for the human resource portion, the job creation portion. And that takes a lot of diplomacy, because for many years, and even today, especially media, consider themselves kind of competitors, when really, my mindset and my history is around collaboration and dropping those perceptions that just because they're doing this and you're doing this doesn't mean that you're against each other or fighting for the same audience. It's much bigger and broader than that.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about maybe your most successful ad campaign or media campaign that you worked on, and why you think it was, why you think it worked so well.
Well, I would go back to the cooperative advertising campaigns that we did every year, and the reason why those were so successful is because it was such a collaborative effort. The media would come together with opportunities that were based on exactly what my needs were for my clients. And so I would say to the media, here's what we need for a year-long campaign. What can you bring to the table? And they would get all creative about how we could do different ads and things like that. And then we would have a big meeting and bring all the tourism partners together and introduce this co-op program for the year. So they were basically getting a value of, maybe they would come to the table for a year-long package for $12,000, when really one or two of those ads, if they bought them on their own, would cost $12,000. So instead, they're getting all the benefits of a campaign with inquiries and all that goes with a bigger spread. We used to do 8 pages in our state magazine. It was a whole spread that was an insert in the magazine that was just about Western North Carolina. I'm very proud of being able to take couple $100,000 a year perhaps, and turn that into, $500,000 in media spending. So as far as pinpointing one specific campaign, I feel that my agency we were successful in every campaign That was the nature of our business.
Yeah.
But those were brilliant.
And I love that. I think that the thing that I'm hearing, and an exact example isn't necessary, is that there's understanding people's incentives, understanding what a win looks like for all of the parties involved, and having a dialogue or a conversation long enough to understand what is needed and what looks like a win and what the resources are available. That's the thing. And it seems like you do an exceptional job of assessing what's happening, finding opportunity, and making everyone feel like A, they're participating, but B, that they're sharing in the win. And that's a very special skill, but it seems like it's one that's learnable and practicable, and that you can get better at over time. Does that sound fair?
Absolutely. In fact, I always take it back to being a kindergarten teacher, because what you just described is no different than what you learn when you're 5 years old. And we forget that as we grow up. And so if we can remember everything that you learned in kindergarten, which I think somebody actually did.
It's a book, yes.
It's a
fantastic book.
Well, there you go. That should be the way that we live our lives. And I think sometime as marketing people, that's what our jobs are, is to remind people, look, this is not, there's not a big learning curve here. It's just being able to trust. That's a big, big part of it. In fact, I did I'll just tell you this real quick. I did a sales job for the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area when they were building their visitor center on the Blue Ridge Parkway. And they were putting in the visitor center a new technology called an eye wall. It was something that somebody had seen, and it was basically what they were wanting to create was a map of the entire Blue Ridge Parkway that had a big screen that you could pull across and things would pop up. It was a brand new technology, never before done. There was a company in New Jersey that was making them. They were basically making them as a timeline for different banks and organizations. But our visionaries had this idea that it could be used as a map, and that people would buy ads. So as you're going up the parkway, there would be, at exit, mile marker 20, you can go to Joe's fruit stand or whatever, go to the Cherokee Indian Reservation. So they needed like $180,000 to build the eye wall. And they said, Marilyn, we'd like you to go out and sell that for us, because you know everybody in tourism and you could do it. And they sent me to New Jersey to meet the people who were creating it, and they were trying to show me what it was all about. And I would make these appointments all the way up the parkway, all the way to Roanoke, Virginia, to meet with tourism people and businesses and tell them about this great eye wall and this great thing that I wanted them to be a part of. And they were like, well, can you show us what it looks like? No. Can you show us what what's the return on the investment? I don't know. Except that it's going to be the first advertising on federal land. Had to get an act of Congress to approve that. And I called it faith-based marketing. You just have to have faith that what I'm telling you is going to be really, really great. And they were like, okay. And then it did get to be great. It was really great. It's still there. It's a living history to this region. So when you talk about that, you have to remember that trust, creating relationships, that is what's so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is the story that I was remembering and not able to
the eye wall story.
The eye wall story, and saying, let's throw an ad in there, which, I think it's a funny thing. There are a lot of ways for businesses to make money. And one of the many ways is with advertising or through advertising or by allowing sponsorship and advertising. And I've historically, personally, had a really mixed kind of opinion about advertising, in so much as there are good forms and then there are bad forms. Like a bad form is a spam email that like I didn't sign up for, someone connected me to someone, or someone purchased a list that I was on, and emails me out of the blue. I don't like that. I think that's bad advertising. What you're talking about is, here's this physical map, and letting someone know that they're a mile away from Joe's fruit stand isn't spam. Like, that's helpful. And whether that's just an example of what a decent advertisement looks like, or that is somehow profound, I don't know. But I think it again goes back to what I would call a superpower of yours, which is attempting to create things that are valuable, and knowing that audiences are valuable, communities can be valuable, visions, and creating a shared future and doing that well is in and of itself valuable. And I'm wondering, with this shared sense of future, like where, and it's a little bit of a jump, but like where are you now, and what are you thinking about as future for Asheville, for your business, which is evolving? We're now doing these remote interviews for our podcast, for your podcast. When you think about like the fate of what the future holds for us as a community, for you as a business owner, for us as business owners, what things are coming up for you?
Well, I've been really paying attention lately because this, I think, being homebound, businesses having to close up and let everybody go was so sudden. Like one day we were a bustling, hustling community that was thrust into, I felt a lot of negative dialogue personally around tourism and infrastructure and money and greed and capitalism. And, I was kind of at my wit's end just in trying to recognize, who is this community? I really was. And then this happened, and all of a sudden, people started working together, helping each other out. Kay Bentley, she's got a van. Her business is closed up.
And I just want to, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want
That's
to
okay.
sent that this podcast is being recorded during the pandemic and everything is shut down, the coronavirus, just so if anyone's listening, 6 months, 7 months later.
Yes. So with all that said,
early April.
Yeah.
2020.
2020 it will live forever.
Yeah, we'll always remember.
But I guess what I was getting at was, when looking at a timeline like what we've been talking about, from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s and then the 2000s, and getting to where we are today at 2019, let's say, by the end of the year 2019, things had hit, I felt, a remarkable benchmark. They had put up a stop to any hotel being built. There was so much public outcry of too many hotels, too many tourists. But at the same time, businesses continuing to open up and be successful because of that feeder market who were supporting them. And all of a sudden, it's gone. That everything is just shut down. And being able to see those who are helping and being of service, who have resources, I think that's where I see hope and goodwill in our community. But how is it going to change? Where is it going to go from here? I think that's as wide open as how long are we going to be self-contained in our homes? We just don't know. I think I think what's most important right now, and the focus for me personally that's giving me drive and motivation, is hearing people's stories and being able to archive people's stories. Because when all is said and done and the brick and mortar is gone and things are shut down, what will always live forever are the stories. And when I look at my career, writing my book, The Rise of Asheville, a series of stories about collaboration and building community, All those stories are so important for people to even step forward today, to be able to remember that, oh yeah, there was a time when people recognized that people were hungry, and they made a phone call to some guy named Bob Ingle, who had a grocery store, and said, what do you do with all your food? And he said, I throw it out. And they said, literally this one person who called him said, would you give it to us if we came and picked it up? He said, sure. And all of a sudden, people were like, who's got a truck? Who's got a hand truck? Where are we going to put the food? How are we going to distribute it? And today, Manna Food Bank is distributing meals to so many people every single day. Well, that was because somebody made a phone call and said, do you have resources we can have? We're going to have to get back to that level right now. That's how I feel.
I think that's really important right now, especially because people, I think, have been for so long so dialed into this digital world that they forget sometimes it's just as simple as making that in-person connection with someone, or giving, like you said, their van to, move food or whatever it is. So yeah, I think that's a really important point. Do you think that you'll ever write another book or add maybe an addition to the Rise of Asheville with more current stories?
Well, now that I have the capabilities here to do recordings and podcasts, I'm finding that I really enjoy that so much. And of course, I've been doing my Speaking of Travel. This is the 7th year, so I've interviewed going on 350 people. There's a book right there at some point.
Yeah. And you could hand that to somebody and say, find me the book, because the asset of the information is already there. Now it's just a mining experience. And I don't know if you or we are positioned to be our best, miners. There are other people who seem to be better than me at that.
I call that hire to your weakness.
I think that's so true. We have not yet hired to our weakness. We are looking forward to the day where we're handing work off to people. And one of the things that has stood out for us is we now have a podcast sponsor. So somewhere either in the beginning or the end, or maybe both, and in the middle, who knows? There will be a sponsor on this episode. And I want to give you a on-air, recorded shout out for supporting us through that process, because what you model for us is something like what you're talking about in the future, which is there's a world where we each have a podcast. And so because of that, we are somehow, in opposition, right? As though to say, if your podcast grows, ours shrinks, or if ours grows, yours shrinks. And that's not necessarily a wrong perspective. It's not my perspective. I can understand if someone were to assume that, but I don't believe that podcasting is a zero-sum game. I think that it's a positive-sum game. If your audience grows, ours has the potential to grow. This is all good things. Having you on our podcast, great thing. But when we sat down, there are many ways to have a conversation with someone who is in your field. The way that you treated us, advised us out of the gate, it empowered us. It left us feeling even more confident than we had going into the meeting with you. And it is, if not the reason, a very real reason why we have a sponsor, and why, if there is a chance that we offload some of this work to someone, we now have a little bit of money to do it. That's amazing. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And I have to say, I just knew when I first met both of you that you had the passion and the vision to do exactly what you're doing, and that you would be very successful. So I say, right on.
Well, thank you. I'm wondering, when you think about where you are in your podcast today, 7 years in from where it started, I mean, clearly you're on iHeartRadio now. So there have been things that have changed, but how have you changed? How has your podcast changed? When did you record the first episode? It was 7 years ago. What stands out, and how's that different from today?
Well, I have to say, I'm glad that you asked, because just recently, because we've had more time on our hands, I was going through some old boxes from my Kelso days. When I left the company 11 years ago, how you put things in boxes. And so I'd been looking through some boxes and went down the line, and I found this CD that said, "Speaking of Travel." And I was like, what is that? And I put it in, and it was actually some of the first episodes, the very first, like the first 7 episodes I did were on this CD. So I listened, because I didn't think I had them. Because when I first started, I was never like thinking of myself as being a radio host or having a show. But I had a friend who was starting a small radio network, a community network. And I had found out that he was doing this, and I went to him and I said, would you consider having a show where I talk to people about travel? And the reason that it even come up was because I'd been in a decade of traveling. I'd been really fortunate to have a whole 10 years of being able to travel, but it was coming to a hiatus, and I knew it. And it was like, how can I keep this love of travel? Well, in Asheville, you can't go out to a party or anything without somebody telling you where they've just been or where they're going, which I think has a lot to say about the richness of this community. People do go away and come back and bring those ideas with them. Anyway, he said, sure, no problem. Let's do a pilot. Pilot. I was so excited. And remember, I'd been in media for, 20 years at that point. I knew I was on the other side of the media, buying the media, not being behind the microphone. So I brought in my friend Peggy, who had been in the Peace Corps in South Korea back in the day, and had been invited by the South Korean government to come back, and they were honoring all the Peace Corps volunteers.
We've just met someone who was on that same trip, or maybe there's many versions of that trip, but Joanna Fiorentino's.
Well, they could be connected. Anyway,
yeah, go ahead.
She was my very first guest, and she was my friend, and I knew her story, and she had owned a travel agency, so she was like the travel vortex for me. And so it was a 30-minute show. I didn't have any sponsors. I didn't really have any listeners, but every week I would go in and I would tape this show. I had a producer. And so over those 2 years that I was there at that independent radio station, I started to realize, I think this is something that I'm good at and that I want to make bigger. And that's when I went to iHeart, and who I knew, and I said, would you consider putting my show on iHeart? And it took me probably about 6 months to convince them that it was worthy of coming over. And when they did, which was, this is the 5th year now in April at iHeart, they gave me a producer, Randy Houston, who was actually a producer of mine in 1991 when I was with Kelso. We used to have to do voiceover at the radio station. And he was our guy.
Wow.
And here he was now, my producer. And the show went to an hour-long show. And I had the capability of talking to people all over the world. And so I realized this show wasn't just about travel at all. It was about people who took risks, people who made big, sweeping changes in their lives. Traveling creates this sense of flexibility, like you were saying, being able to make changes on the fly, thinking quickly, being safe, so many things that week after week after week after week after week, I was being inspired. Like I am literally, it's like just putting it straight into my arm. Like, this is so invigorating for me. How could I be anything but optimistic and positive in the way that I live my life by listening to these people every single week talk about these wonderful things. And, right now I'm booked into June. People are finding my show and saying, we want to be on your show. We want to be a part of what you're doing. That makes me very proud. And it has created, at least in my perception, a sense of service. Like I'm creating optimism and inspiration and education and resources for people. And in return, they're going out and doing things that I look at as being exceptional. And now, being, your show is about travel and nobody can travel. What's going to happen? I've kept the guests scheduled. I've modified a little bit. Well, of course, I'm not in the station anymore, so I'm having a new learning curve in how to do my own recording. Randy is there on the other end, putting the show together. But I have modified so that every week I have a 10-minute segment with Tina Kinsey from the Asheville Regional Airport. She comes on and talks about what's happening at the airport because it's open and people do have to get in and out. The airport is one of our most important infrastructure hubs. So that I feel is very important. And then I've been bringing in people in the community to talk about the service that's happening here. Always have a travel story somewhere, but I've tried to modify for the times.
Yeah, you don't want to be tone deaf, and I think that's something we thought about
right
too. And it's so funny that you say it's like every week. It's just so invigorating. I get to hear this new story because we feel the same way in so many ways with this podcast. It's like we would do this even if we're not making really anybody from doing this, right? Like we're just doing this because we enjoy doing it, and whether or not we record it and publish the conversation, it's fantastic just to have an excuse to sit down with successful people who are making it in Asheville in some way. So
just humans, the depth that you can get in a conversation with anyone where you just give it space and allow for whatever to come up is incredibly powerful.
Yeah. And it's archival. That's the most beautiful part. I've always been a big fan of StoryCorps on NPR. They actually came to Asheville for 6 weeks, and the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area sponsored StoryCorps. They go around in an Airstream, that's a studio, to different cities. And then people come in and they interview each other, like a dad and a son or a grandparent or whatever. And those stories are archived at the Library of Congress. Every one of those StoryCorps stories are archived. And I feel that every story that we do, that I do, that you do, that other podcasters are doing, where they're talking to people now, that they're archived. You have them. They might not be sitting at the Library of Congress, but they're recorded. And the people who you're talking to always have that to keep with them. You can't really put a dollar sign on that at all.
You can. We also have a friends, a couple, and they have their own podcast called Husband and Wife Talk. And one of the things that they always say, they're like, even if we don't have any listeners, it's so cool because when we have kids, we're going to be able to give these to our kids, and they're going to be able to listen to us forever, and then pass that on to their grandkids. I mean, assuming that the technology is all going to be compatible with, whatever is the future.
I have, excuse me, I have a 9-year-old granddaughter, and I'm very fortunate that she lives 3 doors down, and we're kind of all together in our quarantine pod. So she, is having to do home study now and not be with her friends and such. So she and I have started a podcast. It's called Real Kids, Real Stories. And she comes over once a week, and she actually calls me from my upstairs phone. Mm-hmm. So she's sitting upstairs. She calls me, and she writes out each week the questions that I'm going to ask her. Is it easy for you to be home with a sibling? Does it ever get boring without your friends by your side? What kind of schedule do you have? Is it easy to keep up with your schedule every single day? I ask her these questions and she answers them. Right.
That's so cute. Oh my goodness.
I know. And so now I want to take it out to other people's kids and have, a weekly episode of real kids, real stories, talking about what is it like right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
we can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I forget where I heard this, but it was something to the effect of, I think it was Brene Brown. I was listening to a podcast with Brene Brown, and she was just talking about how everyone is grieving right now. Everyone, even your 3-year-old or 5-year-old, they are grieving because they've lost their world in their life, and that we need to recognize that, and we need to, understand that is a real loss. And so,
that's what actually sparked it. Was she's been so positive for what I consider a long time already, with this new reality of riding her bike and sitting in front of a computer and learning how to do Zoom calls with her friends and her teachers. And I could tell she was just a little down. And I said, you know what? Why don't you come into my studio and let's record us talking. And the first one we did was just her and I talking. It's very candid, and that's when the light bulb went off in my head. Wow, she really needs to talk about this. And being able to do it kind of anonymously like that was very deep. That first one was it was really very deep. In fact, I'll send you the link so you can listen.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it public? Can you?
Yeah, I created a Buzzsprout podcast platform, and we'll start to upload them on there.
Yeah, I'm all in on that. I think. And the beauty for me in that is, your granddaughter gets to voice things that could otherwise be pent up, in and of itself powerful. But there is, I will say, our greatest lesson of 2019 was just in creating content consistently. Any content, in my opinion, is powerful, but audio content is particularly powerful because there's an ability to create depth in tone. We could have written this down, right? We could have transcribed it and pushed it onto the internet. But if you can hear your voice and hear our voice and hear how Sarah delivers the same sentence as me, it just there's something really special in that. And I think that learning the skill early, getting comfortable in that skill early, realizing that you can create something that other people can participate in, that is such a amazing skill that I to learn at 31 or to learn at 40 is, I don't think it's great. Learn it whenever, but if you can learn it at 9, that's really awesome.
It is really awesome.
Imagine what you'll be able to create and feel comfortable creating at 20 if this continues. It's an exponential thing, I suspect.
I think so too. And at this point, I'd like to give a shout out to you, because you were so nice to do that. When you talk about 2019 and developing your content, you really went feet first and started lining up people and talking to people and really finding out how people are making it in Asheville. And when you started to create the gatherings, bringing these people together, I went the first time, and it was phenomenal. I mean, here you are, you're new to town, you're new to even this industry, and yet there was this amazing group of people, kind of reminiscent of the Asheville 1000, I have to say, creative, like-minded people who were all there because of you both. And someday when we're able to go back and do those, I know I'll look forward to having you bring just even all your guests together. Was a great foundation, but then everybody else who came, obviously there's a need and a desire to be a part of what you're doing. So good for you.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. And we are doing, I'm going to do a little shameless plug. We are doing the Monday Maker Mixers virtually.
Oh, good.
Taking things up a little now. And the last one we did was actually really great. It was really intimate. We had a lot of people share resources and connect a lot of dots. So that was great. But yeah, if anyone listening would like to join in the next Monday Maker Mix for virtual or in person, we'd love to have you.
That's great.
There's some really cool functionality. So we used Google Hangouts the last time. We're going to use Zoom on this one. But there's some really cool functionality. And depending on how many people show up, even if it's a small group, like that first event blew our kind of doors off. We couldn't have, in our wildest dreams, have expected. We had 80, almost 90 people RSVP and 60 something people show up, which is, for the longest time, we really felt confident that we were putting podcasts out into the universe that we just were not being listened to. Like even my mom was like, "Oh, I wanted to listen, but I couldn't find time," which is understandable, right? Like it was a for us thing, but also we imagined that there could be value in it. And so all those people showing up is special. And if people show up more than, we'll call it 10 or 8, which seems likely, there's some really cool functionality in Zoom to create breakout groups and allow for intimacy and more people able to talk. Because when you have 20 or 30 or 40 people, everyone needs to be on mute. Otherwise, it's just chaos. But you can do fun things like breakout groups and facilitate a smaller scale conversation and do things that feel like actually connecting versus looking at a gallery of 30 other faces that aren't saying anything.
Yeah. There's such a learning curve going on right now. We're all learning these new techniques and gathering new resources.
Yeah. And it's amazing. Last night I was on a call. One of our guests' name is Gareth Higgins. He was episode 42, I want to say. He puts on this movie festival in town and has a couple other projects. And he launched a project which feels something like you might be into, called Dreaming the World. And he's got this whole big vision of putting together a course with like 190 films from every country that's ever produced a film, select at least one from each one, and then have like an education program. He's starting with one film per continent in the first version of this class. And so the first Google or Zoom call for the participants was last night, and there was over 100 people that showed up to this call, and I was one of 2 or 3 people that looked to be in their 30s. The majority were, retirement age or older, like decidedly older. And everyone was using Zoom. And I thought it was the coolest thing. Like, whether it looked like they were maybe holding it on their cell phone or it was down on the cell phone on a table. But there was at least 15 different couples on this call together. And I can't get over how cool that was. Because if we were here, if a pandemic were to have occurred even 10 years ago, the ability to connect like we're able to connect right now, the ability to have this Zoom call and look into what feels like your eyes and see your smile wouldn't have been possible. And I am so honestly thankful that we're able to use tools like Zoom or Google Hangouts or FaceTime to get to see my niece, to get to have conversations with you, and get to hang out with 100 people who I would never, even if, especially if there wasn't a pandemic, I would never have gotten to meet them or have a breakout group with them. It's amazing.
I'll tell you a little story that my granddaughter told me, and it was just, again, very candid, but it rings to that. Here they are, these little third graders now learning how to use this technology. And she said that when they go into their study sections, they can see the other students who are there at the same time, which I thought was kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, what does that feel like to see these other kids who were your classmates? And she said, well, it's really cool because some of these kids, even though they've been in my class, I didn't really know them. I didn't really know who they were. And now I can even just click on them and start a conversation with them. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, how cool is that? And how perceptive, too, that in a class of 25 kids, she recognized, oh, these are my friends over here. I don't really know these other kids. But suddenly now through this technology, oh, there's that kid who sits in the back who I never knew. Now I know who it is. I love that. I think that again, it's that kind of hope for the future of, okay, things are definitely different. And we're not sure what is the new normal, if there ever is going to be anything like that. But in the present, there is this new way of communicating, and that's okay.
It is.
Yeah. And I'm willing to bet there's a lot of really good things that are going to come out of this, and that a lot of us are going to be a lot better at communicating using technology than we were before.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I've never personally been a big fan, not a big fan. I've just never had really the inclination to sit on webinars and online classes. It's like, oh, my list of to-do things doesn't really allow that kind of time. Well, now I do have that kind of time. So I'm very observant and focused, but I'm starting to recognize, oh, look, I just spent an hour and I learned so much by taking this online class or being a part of this webinar, to where I want to learn myself now how to do online classes so that people can come to me and I can be teaching, but not going out.
Yeah.
Same. When I can go out.
Same. That's. I think that you're onto something. You're seeing around the bend, as are we. And so for a hopefully smooth transition, what I hear us all saying is that the world is changing fast. And so with that in mind, let's move into a speed round. We're going to ask you a couple of questions that do not require fast answers, but we are attempting to create a segment we're calling a speed round. And so we'll lead it with this question. What book, if any, are you reading right now?
I just actually put down a book called The Paris Photo. The Paris Photo. It's a novel that's kind of a historical fiction of that goes from World War II in France to today and back and forth. A woman writer who came to Malaprops and did a talk that I wasn't able to see. But right before all this happened, I had gone into Malaprops, saw it on the shelf. It was a signed copy, and I just put it down.
I love that. You're traveling through books.
Two thumbs up on
definitely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What's your favorite place that you've traveled to?
Well, I've been very fortunate to travel to a lot of places, but what always comes to my mind first is Cuba. I've been there a couple of times, and I just love it so much. The people and they're, unfortunately are being hit really hard right now. So always sending thoughts to them.
Yeah.
Love that. How about and I imagine this might be hard to pin exactly, but your favorite thing or things to do in Asheville?
Well, I love to walk. So walking in neighborhoods is one of my very favorite things. And I'm fortunate right now. I've lived in Weaverville since I first moved here in 1977. And I've never really had a chance to just wander around the whole town of Weaverville because it goes way back. So that's been my my get out and go do something is to walk, and I have now walked pretty much every inch of Weaverville, which I'm so glad that I live here. But I love to walk, so that's one of my favorite things.
Love it. Great answer. All right. What's the most perhaps uncomfortable thing that you've done but had a good ending?
Ooh. Well, I would say starting this podcast was really that first time that I had my interview with my friend Peggy. I was so scared and so nervous, and listening back to being able to find that and listen to it, it was like, oh my God, was that really me? I can't tell you how nervous I was to get behind a microphone and hear my own voice. And I was embarrassed, to be honest with you. Like, oh my God, I was embarrassed. But now I feel like it had a really great ending.
Yeah.
A new beginning.
Yeah, fantastic. Definitely can relate to that a little bit.
For sure. I suspect that that's always the case. Like, I'm a big believer in the best time to start would have been a year ago. Otherwise, it's right now. And your first whatever is always going to be some version of embarrassing or bad. So I'm so glad that you started. We're now going to play word association.
Oh boy, you guys are game players.
Asheville, community. What happens in your brain? What happens next?
Well, collaboration is always what happens in my brain. Asheville, community, come together. That to me is the most important part of, I feel, the whole history of where we are today, why you even wanted to come here, is playing together in the sandbox.
Sharing, being nice to each other.
Exactly.
Kindergartners. Fantastic.
We will have links to everything I needed to know I learned as a kindergartner. It is a great book. And
it's a great book.
Yeah.
That's just
timeless.
one of the stories though, right? That like it's a whole kind of mixed
bag. Yeah, exactly. There's one story called that, and the whole book is a compilation of all the stories. Last question is, if we had a magic wand, or someone in our audience had a magic wand, what one thing would you ask for from them?
Oh, that's a tough one. I guess it would be
It can also be something super simple that you just want.
Yeah,
right now.
I was
maybe
thinking
you're
of like a smile. That if there was somebody out there who had a magic wand, they could just put a smile on everybody's face. Because times are tough, things are different. There's so many mood swings and people going through different things. But somebody told me a long time ago, a person of great wisdom, that the greatest gift you can give is a smile. And I like to always feel that that's something we just all need to pass around.
There is abundance. There is no, you don't lose anything when you give that one away.
Exactly.
And I think that is a great ask. We will champion that. We will. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that Sarah and I are showing teeth with our smiles.
I love that. And I do want to say something else too, to be sure that I get this out there before we go. Is there was a woman here in Asheville for many, many years. Her name was Laurie, and she had a restaurant downtown called Laurie's. She was very active in our community, very important leader, visionary, and she was an inspiration to so many people. And she coined a phrase, "Don't postpone joy." After battling cancer many times, and riding her bike across the country for cancer research, and just such a valuable human being. And to this day, you can still find bumper stickers that say, "Don't postpone joy." It was plastered everywhere. When I end my show, I always say, go out and have a great week, and, go take a walk in nature. And remember, life is short. Don't postpone joy. And I asked Laurie's sister if she would mind if I use that when I first went on to iHeartRadio. And she said Laurie wanted that to be universal. So I'm passing that on to you and to your listeners, that we have to be able to look at life and not postpone joy. Be in it now.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us and with everyone. Marilyn, where can we find more information about you and your podcast on the internet?
I have a website, is speakingoftravel.net. And when you go to speakingoftravel.net, you can click on the landing page there, and it will take you to all my past podcasts. So, and there's a description so you can see who the person is and what the topic is. I've interviewed musicians, authors, just people who travel, and people in the industry. Great stories can be found there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marilyn.
Thank you.
And I will just say, too, that you can go to Malaprops and find my book, The Rise of Asheville. You can also find it at, I guess all of those places are closed. So you could go to Amazon and order it today.
For sure. We will.
Well, and is Malaprops open for delivery? Are they
delivering
they might
books?
I heard that they might
call.
be. Yeah.
Well, let's put a plug in. I always like to support my local bookstores.
Same.
We absolutely will. We'll, yes. So we'll have links to your book, to Malaprops, to all of we took a lot of notes. All of the notes will be linked to on our show notes page. But Marilyn, thank you so much for your hospitality. Thank you so much for the warm welcome and the advisor role that you play in our world. It means a lot. So thank you again.
I'm so glad. Thank you.
And that was episode 51 with Marilyn Ball of Speaking of Travel. What a absolute sweetheart. So we didn't necessarily go into all the detail up front, but we mentioned it in the episode itself. Marilyn has been like this incredible advisor to us. She's empowered us. She's supported us. And we cannot honestly thank her enough for the way that she's welcomed us into this community. She's opened doors and connected us with folks in town. And I think that is the model that we aspire to live into.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's shown us a lot about Asheville that we might not have learned otherwise, and are taking some of those lessons and applying them to our own approach to community and collaboration. So we thank Marilyn a ton for her advice and her wisdom. We mentioned a couple of things during this episode, including Marilyn's book and her podcast and a few other local Asheville things. So if you want to learn more about all of those things, you can visit our show notes page at makingitinasheville.com/051. We have all the links there, and plus, a little more information about everything.
Oh, for sure. And if you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. And the way that you would do that depends on the platform that you listen to us on. If you're listening on a podcast, please follow the link in the description on the podcast to Apple Podcasts, where you can leave either a 5-star review or a comment about the episode and what you enjoyed. Those comments and reviews help other people find this podcast. It helps the stories of our guests like Marilyn get told, and it helps this community grow even bigger and stronger. And so for that, we thank you. If you happen to be listening on YouTube, a like, a subscribe, all of that is helpful as well. And then the last thing that we'll say is that if you can, and if you're interested, we'd welcome you to join our email list where the real magic happens. It's one thing to get the podcast episodes each week if you're subscribed on the podcast player or on YouTube or whatever. It's another thing to participate with us and communicate with us in our email list, because that's where we share some behind the scenes, some extra info about some of the episodes. And it's where we announce our community events primarily. And so we welcome you to join our email list. And the place to do that is at makingitinasheville.com/subscribe.
We want to take a quick moment again to thank our sponsor for the season, Range Urgent Care. As you mentioned in the beginning of the episode, you have a chance to get a free month of any annual membership at Range Urgent Care. This is only for Making It in Asheville listeners. And you can visit makingitinasheville.com/range to learn a little bit more about the services that they offer, including low cost, transparent pricing, and subscription memberships.
It's such a gift in a world, or at least in a community, in a culture that has like a very, very complex, overly complex healthcare system. It is a breath of fresh air to have something in our backyard that offers such a new take on healthcare. It's something that I'm very excited to champion. And I hope that you check it out. So one more time, makingitinasheville.com/range. Our other sponsor of the season, as always, is Making It Creative. And so Sarah and I, if you don't know, have our own marketing, sales strategy, consulting, digital strategy. Like, we are working with businesses here in Asheville and across the country on thinking strategically about their business, about their audience, and about the opportunities that are before them to make a deeper relationship with their audience and grow their business. And so sometimes that looks like marketing and traditional kind of marketing strategies. Sometimes it looks like sales strategies. Sometimes it looks like optimizing websites for conversions and SEO. If you're interested in having a conversation that sounds like something we just said, please visit makingitcreative.com, and it is very easy to reach out to us there and let us know what you're thinking.
We also want to take a moment just to remind you about upcoming Making It in Asheville events. So right now, with COVID-19 happening, we are taking our events online and offering virtual events. We will have our monthly Monday Maker Mixer. Oh my gosh, I don't know why that was really hard to say. It's like too many M's. We'll have our monthly Monday Maker Mixer at the end of the month on the last Monday of April. It will be virtual. We're going to have some really fun questions. We're going to break out into small groups. You're going to get to meet a lot of people that are local here and perhaps get to figure out some local resources that you might not have otherwise found.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that stood out to me about our last Monday Maker Mixer is that perhaps even more powerfully than any of our others, which were only two, but there was very real community building. There was very real communication, and there was like explicit value. And so I'm excited about this evolution of our community building into this digital world, into Zoom, where we can do breakout sessions and facilitate conversation in a way that might have been harder or more complex in physical space. Or in a bar. So if you're interested in that, please, the place to visit would be makingitinasheville.com/subscribe, or just our homepage. If you're on our email list, you'll be the first to know when those RSVP slots get announced.
Yeah, definitely. And we also have some other events and courses coming up as well. So again, definitely get on our email list so that you can be the first to hear about those. That's where we announce everything first.
Perfect. And so episode 51, Sarah, I'm not the best at math, but if we've been doing an episode a week and we're on episode 51, does it mean that next week is a 1-year anniversary? Or did we publish 2 in 1 week once? I think we're really close.
I think we published 3 in the first week that we launched. Yeah. So I think we started creating our podcast episodes around this time, but we hadn't published them. So it's hard to say. Yeah. So it's like almost our anniversary.
I know. So today, when we record this, is Sunday, April 12th, Easter Sunday. And we've officially owned the website Making It in Asheville for 1 year.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Bananas.
So thank you, listener, for making it this far in episode 51. Thank you for sticking around and being a part of this community, joining in the first year. It means the world to us that anyone listens to this other than our moms is seemingly a miracle. And so we are in your debt and at your service. And thank you so very much for being a part of this. And with that, high five, Sarah.
High five.
Hey, thank you for watching this on YouTube. How cool. We wanted to let you know that you can check out our last episode somewhere in this area.
And we have a special episode for you somewhere in this area.
And somewhere on the screen is a button that helps you subscribe. Thank you so much.